I want to linger a little bit longer on this 71 issue. How was media acting during the war in West Pakistan, and what has been the media's contribution so far in the...
Remember, 71, Pakistan is still under martial law. So the media is very controlled. Remember that, number one. Number two, as I said, Pakistan is quite isolated in terms of communications. So very few people knew what was happening. When I arrived on March 25th, I was on the same flight as Mr. Bhutto. He was sitting 5 seats ahead of me. And inside me, it was like a storm, like a tufan, it was like a raging storm. Because I just saw what was happening in East Pakistan, and I said, it's finished. And he came out of the plane, he was just a few feet ahead of me, and he said, we have saved Pakistan. And I said, this is the end of Pakistan. So when you ask this question, what were Pakistanis thinking? Most Pakistanis had very little idea of what was happening there. Otherwise, I find many Pakistanis, when they talk to me, have a lot of sympathy, a fellow feeling with the Bangladeshis now. They have a lot of sense that, oh, they're good people, they were like us, maybe there was some ziyati done to them. Maybe we did something wrong. A lot of Pakistanis feel like that. And I think that's a very good basis to begin to have a relationship or friendship.
Right. Today, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they have come a long way. How do you compare the developments in these two countries?
Well, I am very proud as someone who had served in that part of the world to see how well Bangladesh has done. I see the figures for Bangladesh, for export figures, GDP figures, income per capita figures, education figures, and they've done very well, and I'm very proud of them. A lot of my batchmates who did very well in Bangladesh, Shafi Sami, Kamaluddin Siddiqui, Hassan Ahmed, all these were my distinguished friends from the civil services. They've contributed to the growth of Bangladesh, and we wish Bangladesh the best. We wish them well, we pray for them, they succeed, they thrive, and they become a role model for other countries. And they can play a very important role in that part of the world. Remember, on the one side, you have the crisis of the Rohingya, on the other side, you have the crisis of Sri Lanka. So Bangladesh can offer a model, a role model as a strong, stable nation with a large Muslim majority population.
As an Islamic scholar since 9/11, you have been also writing a lot about how to bridge the gap between the West and the East as regards understanding Islam.
Yes, for me, as in 9/11, and I was here in America, I just arrived, I was teaching one of my first classes at American University, and 9/11 happened. And I realized then, because I had lived through this life, you see, I was in East Pakistan, Waziristan, Balochistan, I knew that there's going to be a huge crisis, that the Muslim world is not prepared. And Americans knew very little about Islam. So I dedicated myself, and I took some of my students with me, into promoting a better understanding between Islam and the West. And I took this in broad sweeps. So I've written 4 major studies, all published by Brookings Press in Washington, which is a major think tank, as you know. The first was how the Muslim world looks at the West, then how the West looks at the Muslim world. The third was how tribal societies look at the central government. You see, we often overlook tribal societies, Balochistan, Pushtun, Suba Sarhad, the tribal areas, Yemen, the Kurds, Somalis, these are all tribal societies. They have their own way of looking at the center. So they don't look at things in terms of Washington and Delhi or Washington and Kabul. They look at things in terms of their relationship with their central government. See, like in Bangladesh, you have the Chittagong hill tracts and the tribes there. So they have a slightly different way of looking at it. And their point of view is often neglected. So this was my third big study. And the fourth, of course, was Europe. We don't fully appreciate that Europe has a long and complicated history with Islam. There were the centuries of rule in Andalusia, then the centuries under the Ottomans, during which the Muslims contributed immensely to European culture and art. You'll be surprised at the contribution of the Muslims to Europe. So when Bengalis in London, and we went to the Bengali mosques in East London and so on, when they're being victims of racism and so on, or Pakistanis in Bradford, the racist doesn't realize that these Muslims are representative of a very rich culture, a very rich civilization that gave so much to Europe. And if I give you a list of things that the Muslims contributed, you'll be shocked. One small figure, because I'm a teacher, so for me ilm or adab is very important. Cordoba was the capital of Andalusia in Spain, and the main library had 600,000 manuscripts, when the largest library in Europe had 600 books. 600,000 versus 600. Just think of the scale of the Muslim achievement. And that was one library out of 93 libraries. So that, of course, then produced scholars and scientists and architects and poets and writers. And look at it now. When you look at the figures, and I feel ashamed when I look at the figures in the Muslim world, in Pakistan, it's very, very low figures for literacy. Afghanistan, the Middle East, very poor. And I'm glad that Bangladesh is emphasizing education. I really am very pleased, because Bangladesh always had that tradition. I found that even when I was there, Bengalis were very interested in reading, literature, art. Bengali civil servants wrote poetry, Mizanur Rahman Shelley, another friend of mine. So there was that sense of literature and contributing to literature, and that tradition you've kept alive. So unless we rediscover our sense of adab and literature and learning and ilm, we are going to fall way behind, because this world is very competitive, and the world is really moving towards high technology and learning computers and skills. So these are one of the things that I've explored in my study.
The interesting thing is you mentioned the interest in literature. Bengali people have so much interest in literature, and maybe you already know that Rabindranath Tagore, who won the Nobel Prize in 1913, and he was the first Asian to win the Nobel Prize for literature at that time. He always talked about beyond nationalism. His very famous plays and novels deal with the Swadeshi movement during that period in India, when there were clashes between the British Raj and the Indians who wanted to be free. And this transition from a nationalist to an internationalist, he always talked about how to be an international citizen. I think I see a reflection of that in you when you talk about bridging the gap between East and West, Bangladesh and Pakistan, and different countries and races.
Well, Ahsan, we are all really global citizens, including you. We are sitting here as global citizens. And even as a young officer, I must say I had a sense of reaching out. So when I was SDM Kishoreganj, one of my very proud memories is actually visiting the home of the legendary Indian writer Nirad Chaudhary. Now, there was no reason for me to go except to pay tribute to him, and people were surprised. They said, why are you going to this Haveli? You know, it is an old building. Decades later, I was at Cambridge holding the Pakistan chair, and I rang Nirad Chaudhary's home in Oxford. He was by then quite old, and I said, I want to come and call on him. I'm coming to give a lecture in Oxford. And they said, you can't see him. He's old and he's frail and he doesn't meet people. So I said, just tell him I was SDM in charge of Kishoreganj, his hometown. And he came on the phone himself and he said, when are you coming to Oxford? And we sat and talked, and he wouldn't let me go then. He kept asking questions about Kishoreganj and what was East Pakistan and the culture and the people and what was happening. And I would say, I have a train to catch in the next 2 hours. He said, no, you catch the next train. And then I asked him for a blurb for my book then, and he gave me a beautiful blurb, which is on the cover of the book. So again, Nirad Chaudhary was the type of South Asian that we could say we produce with great pride. He knew so much, it was incredible. When I met him, you know, we were talking about the rivers in Waziristan, which very few Pakistanis would know about. We discussed the Fakir of Ippi and the Tochi River, and he knew the first British campaign, the second British campaign. It was amazing. So for me, it was like sitting at the feet of some guru or some master. I didn't feel I'm a Pakistani, he's an Indian. And I think we have a tradition, a legacy in South Asia. You talk about Rabindranath Tagore, and of course he's a giant. And there's so many people like him. Allama Iqbal is another one of these giants that we all share. And this is what we should be aiming for, to appreciate the humanity in each one of us. Because ultimately, the message of all these giants is moving towards a common humanity.
Thank you so very much for coming to our studio today, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. In other words, can I call you Akbar Bhai?
Please, I'll be honored if you call me Akbar Bhai. And let me say dhanyavad, let me thank you for really allowing me to go back half a century and revive memories of a time which had a lot of sweetness in my life and also a lot of sadness because of the way it all ended. But from my side, my heart is always clear and clean, and I really appreciated knowing the beautiful people and the beautiful land of Bangladesh.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ehsan. Thank you.